If we blame somebody for things like being rude to a neighbor or robbing a bank, we typically assume that they could have done something else instead. They could have treated their neighbor with respect, or they could have not robbed the bank. Either way, they could have done otherwise. It seems odd, at least at first glance, to say what you did was wrong while at the same time saying that there was nothing else the agent could have done. In fact, we use the claim there's nothing else he could have done as a defense against moral blame. This suggests a principle that Harry Frankfurt called the principle of alternate possibilities. When discussing this principle in the context of the free will debate, it's often abbreviated PAP for short. PAP states, quote, "A person is morally responsible for what he has done only if he could have done otherwise," end quote. Harry Frankfurt's going to argue that this is false. Before we discuss Frankfurt's argument, let's set out the way in which this is relevant to the issue of free will and moral responsibility. Let's take PAP as our first premise. Premise 1, a person is morally responsible for what he has done only if he could have done otherwise. Our second premise is going to be the premise that determinism is true. For the purpose of this discussion, we're just going to accept this. The rest of the argument's straightforward, but let's just spell it out for the sake of completeness. Premise 3, if determinism is true, then it's not the case that the agent could have done otherwise. Remember, determinism has the motion of each atom, including the atoms that make up one's bodies, determined by the laws of physics. This gives us the conclusion that nobody is ever morally responsible for their actions. This is a simple modus tollens argument. It's like the argument that if we're going to have ice cream for dessert, then we need ice cream. If we have no ice cream, then we're not going to have ice cream for dessert. Frankfurt is going to be questioning the first premise. His argument will suggest that even if determinism is true, an individual can be morally responsible for their actions. The form of Frankfurt's argument is quite simple. If somebody were to say that there are no black cats, an easy way to refute their claim is to put a black cat on the table and say, "You stand refuted." If somebody says that you get a rainbow only if it rains, show them a rainbow under conditions where it isn't raining. If somebody says that you have moral responsibility only if the agent could have done otherwise, show them an example of moral responsibility without the ability to do otherwise. Here's Frankfurt's counterexample, which I've modified a little in ways I hope to make it easier to understand. Agent 1 is planning to do something wrong, murder somebody we'll call the victim, for example. Agent 1 buys a gun, plans out the murder, and leaves home with the intention to carry out the killing. In our version of the story, there's another person we'll call Agent 2, who also wants to see the victim dead. And Agent 2 knows that Agent 1 is planning to murder the victim. But just to make sure that Agent 1 does the job, Agent 2 hypnotizes Agent 1 and plants a suggestion. If Agent 1 were to decide not to kill the victim, then Agent 1 will feel a sudden surge of anger towards the victim and a strong desire to kill him. This urge, caused by the hypnotic suggestion, will be strong enough to motivate Agent 1 to shoot the victim. However, as it turns out, Agent 1 has no second thoughts and shoots the victim. According to Frankfurt, we have a situation in which Agent 1 is morally responsible for the murder of the victim. However, it's not the case that Agent 1 could have done otherwise. If Agent 1 had decided not to kill the victim, the post-hypnotic suggestion kicks in, and Agent 1 shoots the victim anyway. No matter what happens, Agent 1 was destined to shoot the victim. Yet, to repeat, we have a strong intuitive sense that this doesn't matter. Agent 1, who left home with the intent to murder the victim and carried through with the plan, is still morally culpable for the murder. The inability to do otherwise doesn't weaken this judgment. This then shows that PAP, the principle of alternate possibilities, is false. We have a case of moral responsibility without the ability for the agent to do otherwise. And if PAP is false, the original argument, where it's claimed that there's no moral responsibility because people do not have alternate possibilities, is unsound. This argument, at least, fails to show that the truth of determinism is incompatible with moral responsibility. I think we can make this easier to understand if we look at Frankfurt's source for this argument. Frankfurt actually began by looking at how coercion influences moral responsibility. If somebody, say, sets fire to a neighbor's house because their child has been kidnapped and will be killed if they refuse to set fire to their neighbor's house, this would be taken as reason to deny moral responsibility to the arsonist. Frankfurt then asked, what if the individual wanted to set fire to his neighbor's house and was intending to do so anyway? When the hostage takers make their demand, it makes no difference. Instead of just burning down the neighbor's house, one now burns down the neighbor's house and gets their kids back. In this case, the existence of the threat does not diminish the agent's moral responsibility. Here's the important point. If the agent did not want to set the neighbor's house on fire, he would have done it to save the children. Either way, he was going to set the neighbor's house on fire. There's no way that he was going to act otherwise. Yet, he's blamed if he sets the fire willingly and frees his children as a fortunate side effect, and innocent if he reluctantly sets the house on fire to save his children. The presence of the threat only removes moral responsibility when it becomes a part of the reason the agent set the neighbor's house on fire, in this case to free the kids. Yet the existence of the threat means that the agent could not have done otherwise. Since Frankfurt published his article, philosophers have noticed other cases in which individuals are held morally responsible for their actions, even though they could not have done otherwise. These are cases in which a person is given moral credit for an action, even though, in their own words, they could not have done otherwise. In 1521, Martin Luther was charged with heresies. He was given an opportunity to save himself by recanting his works. At the hearing, he refused. It's commonly reported that his words were, quote, "Here I stand, I can do no other," end quote. Though he may not have actually used these words, they do describe the position that he took. What he told the court was that he could retract his positions if he were provided reason to do so, but could not do so merely as a response to threats. His conscience would not allow it. If we take him at his word that he could not do otherwise, could not retract his claims in these circumstances, this doesn't diminish the moral credit which he is given for making such a principled stand in the face of possible execution. Moral credit doesn't depend on an ability to do otherwise. Another set of common examples occurs when somebody steps in to save an individual being harassed or threatened, or who needs help. The rescuer may claim, "I couldn't just stand there and do nothing." Again, this is a claim in which the agent asserts that, because of a psychological compulsion, they couldn't have done otherwise. Yet this is not seen as a reason to deny moral praise to the person who acts this way. Again, the agent could not have done otherwise, but the agent is still given moral credit. This suggests that moral credit doesn't depend on the ability to have done otherwise. But what does matter in terms of moral responsibility if it's not the ability to have done otherwise? Well, Frankfurt's answer is that it has to do with whether the action is an expression of the agent's core values. The person who chooses to shoot the victim, the person who chooses death when they could have saved themselves by recanting their views, and the person who rescues another are blameworthy or praiseworthy because their action expresses their core values. The ability or lack of ability to do otherwise is irrelevant. Elsewhere, Frankfurt provided an account of what an agent's core values are, but that's not our concern here. Our concern is with the thesis that an ability to do otherwise is required for moral responsibility. On that matter, Frankfurt gives us an argument to show that the answer is no, it doesn't.